All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the NASW Texas TPACE webinar, Running for Office as a Social Worker. Please know that this is being recorded and it is on Facebook Live, so please be mindful of your camera and any comments that you make in the chat. Know that others can see those. Also, please know that this meeting does have live transcription, closed captioning on the bottom, so you can use that or you can disable it in the settings on the bottom of the Zoom. Thank you again for being with us. My name is Allison Warbolware. My pronouns are she, her, and we are excited to get this started. We are going to go through a few different, talk to a few different social workers who've run for office, hear from them about why being a social worker and running for office is a unique position and it goes along with social work values. So we are going to hear from Audrey Spanko and Ramos, who are both NASW Texas members. And to help moderate the discussion, we have Angela Martinez and Grace Martin, who are both TPACE trustees. But first, we're going to watch a video from another NASW chapter and an amazing social worker who's running for office there to learn from their experiences. Taylor.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and bring up the video. So this is an interview I did with Reggie Harris, Cincinnati, who's running for city council. Give me a thumbs up if y'all can hear sound. I'm not seeing any thumbs up, so.
Yeah, I don't think we can hear it.
Reggie, thank you so much for being here with us today. This is Reggie Harris. He is running for City Council in Cincinnati. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Taylor. Thank you for having me. I do want to share with you, it's interesting chatting with NASW Texas because I lived in Austin, Texas for 7 years. So I have a very close experience with Texas. In my former life, I was a professional ballet dancer, so I actually danced for Ballet Austin. And spent a lot of time touring around Texas. So I have a very fond place in my heart, fond memories of Texas.
That's so great. And it actually transitions great into my first question. I did see that you are part of Austin Ballet, and I was going to ask you about your experience here. So that's so great that you have such a special place in your heart for Texas. So you were a professional dancer before you became a social worker. So what was the transition like and what was the catalyst for that career change?
Yeah, so I started dancing when I was 3 years old, and I trained professionally for the entirety of my teenage years. And so I knew that I wanted to be a professional dancer. So I actually didn't go to college. I went straight and joined the Pennsylvania Ballets. I had a more non-traditional track. After 10 years of dancing, so I started when I was 17 professionally, so I retired at 27 after a decade. And I knew that I always was academically sort of inclined and enjoyed school. So I knew that I wanted to go back to school. And part of that transition, I was working as a teacher at the Chicago High School for the Arts. It was Chicago's first and only public performing arts high school. We had a private school, it's about $25,000 a year. So some barriers there, but it was the public option. And in that work, over the 4 years that I was there, and I graduated the first class of students, my first year I was an adjunct teacher, then I became the dance department head. I witnessed sort of firsthand how trauma impacts students' cognitive achievements, to cognitive development and academic achievements. I didn't know that that was what I was witnessing, but I became very invested in. There was a significant number of children that were really struggling despite the school having lots of resources. So I wanted to understand what that struggle was. And I was also going to school full time as well. And so after I graduated with my undergrad degree, teaching, working with kids, wanting to understand this disconnect I saw, I went to Boston University to get my master's degree in social work. And that's where I learned about trauma. And I sort of retroactively was able to sort of diagnose what was happening in the schools. And so, yeah, that was the kind of dance, teaching, public education, seeing the impact, social impacts on kids in development, social work school. And voila.
And so what led you from there to pursue elected office as a social worker?
So again, thinking about this continuation in the spectrum. So when I worked as a mental health therapist as the bulk of my professional work as a clinical social worker, and then I managed a housing case management program. It was a demonstration grant called Bright Life, where we focused on LGBTQ youth and homelessness, and how do we create culturally responsive systems to ensure that LGBTQ youth in the county that I was in, because they were disproportionately experiencing homeless amongst their counterparts. But in my work as a therapist, and we've seen in housing case management, there are these sort of repeating patterns of housing insecurity, lack of access to education that responded to a need, lack of access to mental health care, low wage jobs, right? Like every situation, one of these larger systemic policy issues kept coming up in my family's lives. And I found myself not being able to be the best therapist in that moment, because I was fixated on the not necessarily in that moment my clients' lives, but I kept seeing these patterns being repeated. And so, my gut was telling me to go towards that macro route to understand these larger systemic issues. And that ultimately, led up to me deciding to run for Cincinnati City Council, because at the local level and local government, you have the most immediate impact on people's lives, right? When cities have money available for affordable housing, that's an immediate impact, right? When cities are working really closely with their school boards, right? And understanding how kids are showing up to school, and then how that's impacting tax structures, how that's impacting cities attracting jobs so that neighborhoods are stabilized and home ownership rates go up so that there's more money for schools, right? Like the decisions that we make at the local level have immediate impact on people's lives. And I would only understand that intimately. Let me rephrase it. And I only understand that intimately because I am a clinical social worker.
Exactly. I agree. Change does happen at the local level. So how, during your campaign, how have your social work skills and knowledge translate to actually running a political campaign?
Yeah, in a lot of different ways. So, you do a lot of assessing when you're running for office. So a skill that social workers have is that, we are trained in assessment. We do long form assessment, we do brief assessments. And so you're constantly sort of understanding, reading the room, reading people, reading scenarios, and trying to understand, people's motivations, people's willingness to change, they're ready, like how my message, how is it impacting you? So that is a skill that I use sort of all the time. And then I think what sets me apart is always being able to contextualize policy in the context of real people's lives, right? So that I very rarely find myself talking about infrastructure or housing or jobs from a purely theoretical standpoint. I'm always able to say, and here is how that decision impacts people's day to day. And here's how here's an example of that decision. And so that really, I think, informs how I think about policy, but also is something that helps me to stand out. And so that's social work, right? It comes up every day.
Love that, bringing the micro into the macro. That's great. Well, I just got one more question for you. So from the experiences that you've had so far, what advice could you give social workers interested in seeking public office?
Yeah, so first of all, if you're interested in running, you should run. Absolutely. I think we need more social workers in public office. The largest, profession running for offices is typically lawyers and businessmen. And though they have perspectives and skill sets, I think that clinical social workers bring a real holistic skill set that, also includes business acumen, because we are often running on very limited budgets. So we know how to prioritize. But what I would say is, make a plan and prepare for it. Think deeply. The hardest thing about running for office, in my opinion, is establishing your why you want to do it, right? And then start making connections in the community in which you want to run, right? You should know all of the local players. You should know people. You should be connected to the community. You should have some relation to the community as a serving body, as a serving, in that sort of vein of servant leadership. Make a plan, and then really commit to running the best campaign that you can run, because you will learn so much about yourself and about your city or your state, your county. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Reggie, for being here today. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Taylor, for doing that interview with Reggie.
Absolutely. And I'd like to add, it was just amazing talking with Reggie. He, as we said before, I didn't really set him up very well. So he's running for city council in Cincinnati, as he said. And I really wanted to highlight one of the things he said, which was, if you want to run, run. And that gave me goosebumps when I originally interviewed him.
I agree. That was awesome to hear. All right. Well, now I'm going to kick it over to Angela to introduce our next speakers.
Hi, I'm Angela Martinez. My pronouns are she and her. I am the board rep for Region 1 for NASW Texas, and I'm also the TPACE chair. And I am so excited to have Allie and Audrey here. This has been a really, I think, important discussion for social workers. I think if we're not going to be candidates or elected officials, we should at least be in every discussion where policy is made. So with that, I will introduce Audrey Ramos. She is an LMSW in Amarillo and works as a therapist for a national telehealth organization. And she ran for City Council Place 4 in May of 2021. In the municipal elections. Allie was also the 2018 board rep, which was my first year. So we were both new on the board, and it was great meeting her and talking to her and knowing that she was in our same region. The second person we have is Audrey Spanko. Audrey was the 2020 Democratic candidate for the Texas State Senate District 1. She's also a licensed social worker and birth doula. And over the decade, she's worked across the state of Texas for various nonprofits and the Department of Family and Protective Services. While finishing classes for her master's degree, she served as an advocacy intern with NASW during the 2019 Texas legislative session. And it was that experience that inspired her to run for Texas State Senate. And Audrey, I have a brother in your district who, and I am going to out him on Facebook Live. He is a Republican, but you were the topic of many conversations during your election, and I know he voted for you. So thank you so much for being here, y'all. And I'm going to kick it to Grace to lead off our first question.
Hi, I'm Grace, and as they said, I'm on the TPACE committee, and I'm about to start my MSW program, but I'm just really excited that y'all are here. And for the first question is, what advantages do you believe you have as a social worker running for office?
Yeah, I will start. My name is Audrey Ramos, and my pronouns are she, her. And what advantages I think that I gained as a social worker while running for office was that, like Reggie said, that we have a lot of experience with close contact with people, and we understand like how everything affects everything. And so like I feel like I was able to speak with the citizens and kind of like get a feel for how, look at it at a bigger perspective, because there was a lot of frustration, and I have never run for office before. And so it was a very big learning experience. Like, I know that if I do it again, I would do a few things different. And you know, it's really like, and also Reggie said that most of the people who do run are businessmen or lawyers, and so they kind of like have a grasp on some of this already. So I just took it on a micro level and like kind of tried to connect with the people who didn't agree with me too. And so I just wanted to have a conversation with everyone.
I'll echo some of the same sentiments that Ali said and that Reggie also said in his video. And I think I've said it a couple of times if you've heard me speak around consequences. We often see unintended consequences and maybe some planned consequences that no one really wants to say out loud, but we often see consequences of policy, and social workers are essentially the front line to dealing with those consequences. When we don't fund certain programs, or we defund certain programs, or we don't provide services for individuals, then social workers are the folks that people are going to interact with. When the policies don't allow for their electricity to stay on, or for them to stay housed, or for various other reasons, then we see what the side effect is. And I think having that knowledge and perspective as a social worker really brings something different to policy and to politics, where individuals who are thinking about, you know, financial return or taxpayer dollars saved or jobs created, we're thinking about the actual human impact of those consequences and what policy can do for individuals. Because as social workers, we see it every day. We see it whether you're working directly in direct service, or if you are in macro work and doing more of the big picture stuff, you see those consequences and how it's actually impacting people. So you can speak to it a whole lot easier and really helping people understand that. And then lots of the other cliches are really helpful as a social worker. Like, we know how to work on a very tight budget because most of us have worked for nonprofits without any money. We know how to, you know, interact with other people on various levels. We know how to have conversations. I always said I got into social work because I like interacting with people, and that's what I'm good at rather than numbers or science. So there's a lot of skill set that just innately as a social worker you bring to the table that could really make a difference in policy and make campaigning a little bit easier, where you may not have to overcome some of those barriers and getting comfortable with your message and what you're working towards, and just being able to provide that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a lot of difficult conversations, but tell me, what do y'all think the biggest hurdle was in talking to your constituents and talking to voters to get votes?
I think the biggest hurdle for me is I do live in Amarillo, Texas, which as a progressive individual who is disabled and identifies as a queer person, I had a lot of people who were very leery of my beliefs, and they were, you know, it's hard to run in a red area whenever you're not, whenever you're completely the opposite. But I was able to go to a lot of the Republican like forums and get to know people, and kind of, like I said earlier, just kind of connect on a personal level and tell them my story and tell them how I feel like I could assist in, you know, being part of the local government here in Amarillo. And so it is a nonpartisan race, but it is not a nonpartisan race in all actuality. So, you know, it was just that was the biggest hurdle, was getting people to listen before they just assumed like what I believed.
Similar experience, Sally. I am in Northeast Texas and ran as a Democrat in a area that has had the senator I ran against was Brian Hughes. He had run unopposed in his last Senate race before this one, and in his House races prior to that. And there was just kind of ingrained space that Democrats just don't run in the area. And so making sure that folks were open to a lot of things, open to hearing from a young woman
from open to hearing from a social worker, open to hearing from a political newcomer, and then open to hearing from a Democrat in a red area. And what worked was really making sure to have those face-to-face conversations and to have those interactions. Senate District 1 is 16 counties, more than 10,000 square miles. So it's a huge space. To be able to actually get in front of someone was the hardest part, because I knew if I could have that human interaction and we could talk about what their values were and how my values aligned and how we were similar and how we were working towards the same goal, was game changing. You could see light bulbs come on and you could see folks actively getting excited about our race, but it was getting in front of people and making sure that we had that FaceTime. And then in addition to how big the district was, how red the district is, there's also that we were campaigning, or I was campaigning in a global pandemic. So that didn't help either and created a lot of barriers as well.
Thank you all so much for that insight. And also, I'm sure it's a multitude of things, but what was the main thing that inspired you to run for office?
The main thing that inspired me is, as a social worker and as a disabled person, I often saw like the inaccessibility that people in the city have to overcome, and the difficulties of accessing social services programs. Just it's such a complicated process to get the help that you need in this area. And so I do come from a place of privilege, as I have like discovered throughout like my social work career. So I want to be able to use that to leverage like my own voice, so that people who have difficulties like advocating for themselves or just don't know how, maybe they can see that someone else is doing it and they can be like, oh, maybe I could be kind of like out in the open, and being a little bit louder than I feel comfortable being, because it does take practice to be in, like, to run for office. It does take a lot of thickening of the skin, because you see things and you're like, oh my God, that's so mean. But like, you just have to like process it, and I loved it. I loved running for office.
So yes, multitude of things as well. As mentioned in my bio, though, one of the deciding influence was my internship with NASW during the 2019 legislative session. I was not a politically active individual prior to running this campaign. I voted every cycle. I helped out with a couple of campaigns occasionally, but it was just not something that was really on my radar. I had been working in direct service for a little while, and then got kind of some life stuff happened and got booted into the macro world, and thought, oh, wow, this is how we make things better. When I was doing direct service, is we change these things. And then I got a job at the state, and I was like, oh, this is how we make all of those grants that I was working on better. We change this pieces and these details, and we change at this bureaucratic process, how to make things better and distribute resources. And so it kind of felt like a stepping stone of like, no, okay, here's where we can actually make some big change. If we get the right people in office and they actually file the right bills and they vote for good bills, then we can get the state to give the money to, like there was a leading process throughout my career as a social worker that just felt like it was the next step, and kind of, to me, the only step that was there. It was like, how am I gonna make some impact? How are we actually going to make this change? And it was like, we've got to put people in races, and we've got to make sure that officials who are going to file bills to strip our rights to vote, to strip our rights to healthcare, to strip our rights for other resources, are contested, and they have to be challenged, and make sure that we're making sure that every single seat is up against somebody who's in it for the betterment of others, not for the betterment of themselves, not for their own personal gain or wealth. Really and truly getting some ethical people with some strong values in. And so after watching what I thought then was a horrific session, nothing compared to this last session, taking away folks' rights and resources. I thought, I have to run. There's just no other way to do this. I went and talked with all of the local parties and was also prepared to just get really, really involved in anyone else who was going to run. And unfortunately, no one else was on the table or even, putting it out publicly that they were considering it. And so I just felt really, really compelled to do that because I couldn't stand to see it happen any other way. It is a lot of energy. It takes a lot of your time, your resources, your family, everything gets kind of just jumbled and is a mess, but is 100% worth it to say, I don't think that what's happening right now is okay. And I know that whether or not I'm going to be able to come up with all the solutions, my social work skills, my ability to network, to build coalitions, and to bring other people into the conversation, bring others up to the table is going to make a difference. And so seeing it in action really was the big kicker and inspire for me to run.
Wow, thank you so much. And this, I think, might segue into the next question. And you talked about your lived experiences, your experiences as a social and also with direct care and your experiences with your jobs and internships. But what was the major issue you really wanted to address while running for office?
The major issue for me is that a lot of the constituents were very upset at the current city council because they felt that they weren't being listened to, they felt that they weren't being heard. And so reading, I would read different comments on articles and I would just kind of talk to people and just kind of see what their perspective was on how things were being run. And so I kind of used that to my advantage to make sure that, as a social worker, I do know how to communicate, and that's my a big passion in my life is to make sure that other voices are being heard and put at the table. And so I also wanted to make sure that all of the neighborhoods are treated equally as far as like budgeting and different, like the roads are just different in every single district or every single neighborhood. And so I know that was a lot of frustration is the revitalization efforts here in Amarillo, and that most of the funds were being put towards certain areas and the other areas were kind of being ignored. And so I liked, I have a lot of friends in the community, like all over town. And so I made sure that I networked with everyone. I didn't want it to just be about me. I wanted it to be like a community effort in making this change. So,
yeah. For me, it was healthcare was the primary item on our campaign plan, was to address the lack of healthcare in Texas, the fact that we still haven't accepted federal Medicaid dollars, that we still could be insuring millions of people in Texas if we stepped up for one another. And that was kind of, one of the big motivations along the way. As mentioned, I'm a birth doula. I have a strong passion to work with pregnant women and children, and to know that we also have uninsured and uncared for women who are pregnant and new moms was just, it's heartbreaking to me that we would live in a system where our maternal mortality rates are worse than a lot of third world countries. And we just don't do anything for women who are sacrificing so much to bring life into our world and into our state. It's absolutely heartbreaking to me. And so that was one of the big motivators for me. It changed and evolved a lot as I was out campaigning, though, where obviously that may not be the priority for everyone, especially individuals who are not in childbearing years or may not have that focus or that passion for that. And so as I started to campaign, it kind of clicked more and more about we need to be campaigning on voting rights, and we need to be doing what so many in the state right now are fighting for in Texas, is to make sure that everyone can get to the polls, has access to vote, because if we do provide access, we make it easier to register. We make everyone an automatically registered voter unless they opt out. We make voter registration online. We do all these things to get people involved in the system and to encourage them to participate civically. Then we can elect people and we can make the change, because we're going to be electing individuals who care about healthcare, who care about making sure that you have a house, who care about making sure your electricity's on. So it was like kind of that upstream that I talked about earlier, is thinking about, okay, folks here are really focused on healthcare, folks here are really focused on housing, jail reform, everything that we can think of that impacts us, criminal justice, making sure that we're breaking down systemic racist barriers and all these other things that we need to do in Texas. How do we resolve all of these issues? And it was like, elect better people, elect people who care. And how do we elect people who care? We get voters in who care, and making sure that they can actually do that and be a part of that process, making sure that voters feel inspired that anybody could run for office, that they could jump in and be a part of it, because they see a number of folks from every background on the ballot. So as I mentioned, started out with, we got to do something about healthcare and we've got to change that. And then it became all about, we need to fix our broken voting system. And obviously that has played out more and more over the last couple of months through this last session. So that was the big change, and also the big policy piece.
Thank you all so much. That's actually the perfect segue into our next question about what flaws have you observed throughout our election process through your time running for office?
For me, it was a lot of the inaccessibility of individuals. They really didn't even know how to register to vote. I know that there were a lot of people who just needed like extra help in this process because it is complicated. And so I did assist people in registering to vote. I had a lot of other people who were going around and making sure that people knew that there was an election coming up, because it was a local election, and for here, our voter turnout is very, very poor. And so I just feel like that was a really big issue in making sure that people were educated about who is running, making sure that people just knew what was happening in their city.
Similar experience. The lack of civic education that we have in Texas has started to create some really big barriers and issues. So folks, I mean, it was a presidential election, and there were still people who I would run into and interact with who didn't know that an election was happening. And you can't blame them whenever we have so many other systemic problems that force that individual to care for 3 children while also working for 3 different jobs and staying busy with, everything else that life entails. So we need to do better with just general civic education and making sure that folks know that they can and should be involved. I found just like the weirdest things that would come up. I wanted to be a deputy voter registrar in all 16 of the counties that I was campaigning in, so that I could register voters anywhere that I was. And the election officials would tell me I couldn't do that. They wouldn't register me to be a voter registrar. They were, lacking in education around their roles and what we can do in our elections code. A lot of people assume that because you're a candidate, you can't register people to vote, and that's inaccurate. And you can do, all of that education and encouragement to get people to be a part of that process. I think the whole system is kind of unfortunately turned upside down and needs major reform, as we're seeing again through this last session. There's a lot of ways that we could fix it if folks were motivated to do the right thing and to make things available for everyone. But it was just, small barrier after small barrier of lack of education around both individuals and citizens, and then also even candidates and others that I was working with. I ran into a lot of candidates who told me that I shouldn't be allowed to run because I was a social worker working for the state previously, or they told me, or other people who I thought would be great candidates, and they would say, I can't run, I work for a nonprofit. And I'm like, where's all this misinformation coming from? You can run, you can be a part of this, and there are no disqualifiers except for you may work for an employer who doesn't want to support you, but just the lack of general guidance for candidates and others who want to be involved in any election.
Wow, thank you, Audrey. That does segue perfectly. We're just segueing perfectly into each question. Thank you for debunking some of those statewide myths, I think, about running for office. And as social workers, we are lifelong learners. And these experiences that y'all had running for office are different than, a lot of other people's experiences. So what was the most important skill that you think you acquired throughout this journey of running a campaign?
The most important skill was learning how to raise money, because it does take money to run, and as much as I wish it didn't, but it does. You have to get support from people through monetary means, through sharing posts, sharing your story, and I don't like asking for money, so it was a really difficult thing for me to kind of process and know that I do need signs, I do need materials, I do need these things in order to get my name out there. And so I think, yeah, just the money part of campaigning is really tough, because it's like, I don't want to spend money on this because people need to eat, and why am I spending money on signs when this money could go towards anything else? And so it's like that was a really difficult thing for me to come to terms with, but I did. And we had a great marketing team and campaign, and our materials were really, really great. So yeah, that was the hardest.
100% agree. It is, you would think, not so hard to say, hey, can you? And I thought, I'm a social worker. I've been asking people for money forever. I'm applying for grants. I do all these things. It's really different when you're asking someone to give you money. I would collectively, we say our campaign and we're doing this and all of this, but really what you're asking is for someone to have confidence in you as an individual, you as the candidate, you as the potential elected, and say, give me your money for me. But it was also you're trying to promote a bigger picture and change potentially. But asking for money is really hard, and getting that skill and being able to do that was definitely the biggest learning curve. And if you're thinking about it, start asking people for money just now, not necessarily for your campaign, but just practice, and don't ever accept it, because you can't accept money unless you've actually filed, but just practice. Hey, Allison, I need to think about running for a campaign, and when I do, I'm going to need some money. And to just practice asking folks those questions and telling them, what you're thinking, and just getting a feel for how it feels to ask somebody for dollars. And then, lesson learned, people will start giving you money. And you have to figure out a way to graciously accept without crying, because one of my biggest that I think about all the time is my first big donation happened face to face with a wonderful human who I had met once or twice in my life, but gave me a fairly substantial donation. And I couldn't believe that someone felt confident enough in what we were trying to do to give me that much money, and I cried in front of them. So I would also recommend not crying and encouraging yourself to, or feeling confident in yourself that you are capable and you are strong. And if anyone is going to give you the dollars, it's because you've done the work and you've got the skill and the education and the desire and the drive and all of the things that it takes to make a positive change and to bring about momentum and just energy into the world. So raising money, biggest hurdle, biggest lesson learned.
Thank y'all so much for sharing that. Yeah, definitely as a social worker, we're used to giving, and being the one receiving it is something so strange feeling. And even though you need to be able to give back to the community. So that's really interesting. And that leads us into Erica's question in the chat. She asked, how much funds do you need to raise to run or need to have to run?
That's a good question. Since mine was like a local level, it's not state or federal. I would take like $5 donations, I would take $10 donations, and then other people would donate like a lot. And so it does eventually build up. It does. You don't think you're going to get any money, or like, oh my God, what if no one gives me money? And then you start panicking, and then people just like, it just starts rolling in. So how much do you need? I think it varies across like what positions you're running for and how many people you need to get the word out to. I know I raised a few. I think it was like 7,000 for like a local, and that was not including like in-kind donations of people who volunteered their services or their video skills, editing skills, graphic design skills. But yeah, I think that was about how much I earned for just like straight gifts money.
Yeah, a great question. And one of those questions that I dug around and tried to find the right answer for when I first started to run. Ways that I would suggest if you're thinking about a state office, considering is to go through the Texas Ethics Commission and pull up the filing reports of previous candidates. So you can kind of get an idea of what was raised and comparable. You can also see, how much per candidate or per vote basically that they raised or that they needed. So our goal based off of that. So we saw some candidates who raised and spent like $15 a vote essentially. So their money divided by the number of votes that they ended up getting was like $15 a vote. That was like the very, very, very high end. And then we saw, down to $1 a vote basically. And we wanted to kind of stay closer to that end. I wanted to be able to do it for not a lot of money. And so I think we ended up with like $3 a vote or something like that, or that was our goal, at least. We ended up with $1 a vote. But we raised about $90,000, I think, which was about half of what we had goaled for, a little bit less than half than what we had been our goal. So it does vary a lot, like Ellie said, from campaign to campaign, from district to district. Some of those where you are running, like myself, against an incumbent with $3 million in the bank, it feels like there's absolutely no amount of money that you could raise that would make the impact that's needed when they could squash you like a bug. But raising anything and getting your name out there, whether you raise $5,000 or $500,000, you're still in the race and you're still doing it and your name's still on the ballot. And that's what makes the difference. So if money seems like a hurdle, understand that it's everybody else who cares how much you raise. Yes, you need dollars to get your message out. And yes, you need to be able to raise money to have the campaign going, but it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be enough just to get out and start talking to people. And if you want to do it and really want to make that win, and you think about, okay, this a first time, I may not win, I'm still getting my name out there, building some name recognition. And then the next time folks who are already interested in your campaign or found out about you because you were on their ballot will start donating the second time around, or fingers crossed that's how it works. But one of the big things that I would definitely remind folks of is that you can loan yourself dollars to your campaign to get yourself started, but you do not have to put your own dollars into the campaign. And that also feels weird as a social worker, because you're like, oh, if this person gave me $500 and I should be able to give myself $500 or $100 or whatever, because if they trust me, I need to be matching whatever they're doing to show them that I'm also invested in this. But you're invested in it as your time, your space, your work, your everything else. And so putting your own dollars into it will just probably hurt you on the back end of it. And so I would recommend, if you are considering running, give yourself a loan if you need the dollars to get started. That way you can pay yourself back as additional donations come in, but don't ever commit your own money into it unless you already have, bunches of money and you really want to do it. But you don't have to spend your own money to campaign.
Thank you. I'm going to kind of jump ahead. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. And it also, this next question also leads into a Facebook question that we also received. So our question is, what advice would you give future social workers who want to run for office? And then the Facebook question we received says, I have plans to get into politics in the future. A lot of my concerns are being brought to light here. What would you suggest to be a first step in anyone interested in running for office?
I would always remember that social work is political, no matter how much you don't want to be involved in politics. If you're in school, make sure you really focus on the leaders of our country and our local levels and state levels. See what they're doing, see what bills are being passed. Trying to just get familiar with the language of being a politician and being in that kind of position. I think that, and like I said, as much as you don't want to be in politics, like if you're a social worker, you're gonna get into it at some point. And so I feel like that would be a really good start if you are not running yet, would be to just peek around, just see what other people are doing, see if you feel comfortable kind of exposing yourself in this way, because like a lot of things that people are going to dig into who you are. They're going to find things, they're going to just make sure that you maintain a professional presence whenever you're in public, and just, yeah.
100% agree. I feel like I've just been mimicking everything that you're saying, Allie, but 100% agree with the idea that you need to engage your local leaders and your not just local leaders, elected officials at all levels now. Just being aware of it, whether or not you're calling their office every day or sending in a bunch of emails, at least knowing what their priorities have been, what bills they've worked on, what bills they've passed. Thinking about, how that impacts us, using your social work background to really think about how that might impact the community and how that might impact the individuals that you work with and yourselves. Just kind of being aware and starting to learn that language. One of the things that I think, obviously working at during that legislative session before running, everything was super fresh around the bills that were getting filed and things that I had learned, and showing up to meetings when we were still able to do the face-to-face stuff of pre-pandemic. It really helped when I could have a conversation, or not even have a conversation, just lead a discussion or give my stump speech, and it included the language of different bills, because whether or not everybody else in the room knew exactly what I was talking about, they trusted that I knew what I was talking about. And they became more interested in the campaign. Oh, this is legitimate. This is a person who's really invested in this, has learned this, who's aware, and is ready to make some change. And so definitely getting involved and understanding what's going on with your current electeds. And then, as Allie mentioned, also maintaining your own professional demeanor and your professional appearance when you're out in public as a social worker and as an individual, because they will dig into everything that they can. And even though I think most folks are now more forgiving than ever before, and understanding that you are a human and not just a robot running for a campaign, your opponent will try everything. And whether or not a voter cares about something that they've dug up on you, you might care a lot about something that someone has dug up on you. And it'll kind of do a setback, sorry, phone call, a setback on yourself. I encountered this once where somebody said something and I was like, whoa. And it took me back, and it took me a couple of days to understand and build that bigger skin that Ali was talking about earlier. And so just maintaining that professionalism and just doing things that you feel like if anybody knew this was happening, there's no issue with it.
Thank y'all so much. It's so beneficial just hearing y'all's advice directly instead of searching through the internet to try to see these little things that you might never learn about. But there's another question from Facebook, specifically for Ali, and it says, how do you feel running for a nonpartisan position? How do you feel running for a nonpartisan position impacted your campaign strategy? And did you ever wish you had the support of a party organization behind you?
Considering the area that I live in, it's not beneficial as much to have one specific party that supports you, because you need both parties to support you. I feel like that, like I said earlier, the biggest hurdle was like getting Republican or conservative individuals to back me. And it was, I was successful in that because we connected on a personal level. And so I did have the Democratic Party behind me and who were helping out my campaign. And it's, that it was really difficult to not just like say what I want to say, because you kind of have to hide, it's not really hide, but you have to relate to everyone in the audience. And that's really hard if people are saying things that you don't agree. And then you have to be the one person running who's like, I don't feel that way. And I you have to kind of stand up for the people that you're running for. And so, yeah, it's really confusing, and it wouldn't be beneficial, like I said, in this area to have just one party backing me. So, and unless I was Republican, then that would be beneficial, but I'm not. So, yeah.
Thanks, Sally. That's so hard. I know exactly what it's like in Amarillo. We have so many great questions, and unfortunately, we won't be able to ask all of them, but I did want to get to Gretchen's question. Tell us, what is the best way that we can support our fellow social workers who are running or are interested in running?
For me, I think the best way would be to volunteer for the campaigns. If that means you can spend a day going to addresses of people who wanted signs, or sharing social media posts, or just, talking to people that like, hey, so-and-so who's running and they're a social worker too. It kind of just brings like this connection that you need, because you're not going to be able to spread your message if it's just you. Like, you need the support of people in your community or in your profession to assist in getting the word out there. So yeah, just volunteer. If you can't volunteer, if you don't have time, like, just share the word. So that's really helpful.
I don't have much to add, but we did end up having on our campaign about a dozen social workers who were friends who met in school or worked with, who helped on the campaign, and they were a critical piece of the campaign. Like, I would not have been able to do it without them. And that was both folks who came to the district or lived in the district and helped put out materials and knock on doors, and also folks who were out of the area who sent text messages and made phone calls. So 100% agree. Volunteering, just asking you know, how can I help? Being prepared not to get an answer for a while, because until they've actually got a team going, they may not have anybody to answer all the emails that come through. And maybe even offering to do that. Hey, can I help you with any of your, you know, emails or connections or communication with anybody? I had a few folks who were on my social media accounts who helped navigate that. And that was what they did, you know, and just having a little bit of that time is super helpful. If time is not available to you, or, you know, you're just feeling swamped and you want to help 1,000 different campaigns, even just sharing stuff on social media and helping bring awareness and encouraging folks to go and visit them on those platforms is really pretty helpful as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to our speakers, Allie and Audrey, for spending an hour with us, and Angela and Grace for helping to moderate. Thank you all for attending and for the great questions that were asked both in the Facebook and in the Zoom. The last thing I just wanted to end on is there was so much great information shared today. And if you're interested in running for office and you're a social worker, please feel free to reach out to NASW Texas, and we're happy to help connect you to resources in your area and to your local NASW branch. If you're not involved, we can help you get involved. And that's a great way to find volunteers. And as Allie and Audrey shared, just getting the word out that you're interested in running for office. And the last thing is that this event was sponsored by NASW Texas TPACE, and TPACE is the NASW Texas PAC. And our goal as a PAC is to endorse candidates that represent social work values. So both Allie and Audrey were endorsed by TPACE during their elections, during their campaigns. And know that if you're interested in getting more involved with NASW Texas or TPACE, please reach out to us and we'll make sure you get the information you need. Thanks again, everyone. This was an amazing conversation. We appreciate all that y'all do. And everyone have a great rest of the week.
Yes, thank you again. And I would like to add that